Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
Hi, I'm Ashley, a true crime fanatic.
I'm Dan, and I don't know anything about true crime.
Together, we host Fuck That, a true crime podcast that covers cases that highlight important topics that are often overlooked, such as wrongful convictions, domestic violence, and social inequities, sprinkled in with the occasional case with spooky themes. If you are looking for your next true crime fix delivered candidly with a hint of sarcasm, you can listen and subscribe to bi-weekly episodes of Fuck That wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to give us a follow on Facebook and Twitter at @FThatPod and at @FThat_pod on Instagram.
Devil is on his way, devil is on his way, devil is on his way, motherfucker, the devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way. Fall to your knees, devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey, y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
And it's 2024.
And it's 2024. I bet this year's going to be just a really good one, right?
Congratulations, Dylan. You've made it through another year.
You know, you hear old timers be like, oh, I'm just glad I made it to another Christmas or something like that. You're like, oh, okay. I'm actually starting to be like, it's like a notch on your belt. I made it through another year. I didn't think that our nation was going to make it this year.
I survived.
We survived 2023. We swore at the beginning of 2023 this is going to be way better than 2022. It was only a little bit better. I'm sure in ways it was worse. So here's to an exciting 2024.
Here's to a questionable 2024 because it could go either way at this point. It could vastly improve or it could vastly get worse.
I think it's much worse. But on a broader note, this, us being in 2024, January 1st, here we are, is the 5th anniversary of Mountain Murders podcast.
That's right. December 28th was our 5-year podversary, right?
Yeah.
So happy birthday to Mountain Murders. We turned 5.
Oh, it's so cool.
It's just a little baby podcast.
It's a little podcast. It can be anytime we can grow up and she grows up. This will be the best podcast.
It can be, Dylan. And without you, it's nothing.
That's not
you
true.
make it the best.
No, me and you together, Heather, and our listeners. Those are the 3 main components of this podcast.
No, it's exciting. So we're over 400 episodes, 5 years of content.
And we were just talking about
Who would have thunk?
A lot of those are hour and a half, 2-hour episodes. So there's so much content behind us.
It's true.
We've left a trail.
I'm looking forward to the future. We have an exciting year ahead.
You know,
a lot of changes and even more true crime for our listeners than they can imagine. We'll be incorporating true crime with our travel adventure.
I've thought of so many
We're going to visit
things
some
to
strange places, maybe where some crimes have taken place. Do
my
all the like morbid tourism, all the spooky ghost hunting. I'm ready for it.
There's going to be some video. And basically, folks, what we're going to try to do is we're trying to go on the road and we're just going to podcast full time. No more excuses. No more the meal. Dylan had to work. Oh, look at him. He sucks. We're late.
It's all Dylan's fault. Yes.
It's all Dylan's fault. I'm sure I can still screw it up while we're on the road. And it'll be like, hey, he kept sleeping. It's all his fault. But no, we're going to concentrate on it. And we can't wait to see what the future brings.
Well, we'll see. We'll remove you from the liability and add you to the asset list, maybe. I have to apologize before we get started. I am battling the crud. It's finally caught up to me. Everyone I know's had whatever this is.
It's super crud.
It's like a super crud. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's COVID, a flu, just a sinus thing, a random cold, a virus. I have no idea. But I am, you can tell, I'm snotty and I'm stuffy.
Oh, nobody noticed.
Yeah, so I know I sound like shit, guys, but that's par for the course, right? I always do. This
That's not
will
true.
probably is part 2 of the Cleveland torso murders, Dylan. Part 2. So we got a lot to cover. Are you ready? Let's get into it.
I am ready, and I love the first part. I learned so much, and I cannot wait to learn a little bit more.
Okay, well, where we left off at part 1, we're picking right back up. So, Dylan, fear gripped the neighborhoods surrounding Kingsbury Run, and that began to spread out into the city suburbs.
Okay.
With increased publicity about the killings, rewards being offered, and Elliot Ness officially taking over the case, it released a flood of tips, mostly from crackpots who wanted their 15 minutes of fame.
And that's the problem. That even happens to this day. Anytime, and sometimes a lot of times are reluctant to go to the press and public. And a lot of times it's a last resort to generate leads and information, because for that one good lead, you're going to have to go through 500 leads. And that's all
true.
Manpower and resources.
Newspaper reporters from Cleveland picked up some news wires from Pennsylvania. In and around the town of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, a killer or killers had been committing similar murders over the last decade. Between 1925 to 1934, 4 murders with identical similarities to the Cleveland slayings had occurred. Most of the bodies had been left in an area nicknamed Murder Dump or Murder Swamp.
Murder Dump? That's very original.
It was a remote, desolate area, and you guessed it, Dylan, it was swampy.
Hey, you got a truckload of murder right there? Well, I know a good place up a road where you can dump it.
So all we need is the bucket of blood and the murder dump. Actually, one of our amazing listeners out west suggested we check out a place in Nevada that's like a bar. I think it's called Bucket of Blood Tavern.
Oh, I'm
It's in,
there.
like Virginia City or something. Yeah.
Dude, I would be expecting like Dusk Till Dawn, the vampire movie part 5 to kick off in a place like that.
Yeah.
Right?
On a day in July of 1936, 2 workers with the Pennsylvania and Lake Erie Railroad approached an open boxcar at a rail yard in Newcastle Junction. The car had been closed when last inspected a month or so earlier. Inside, the rail workers were faced with a horrifying sight. The nude, decapitated body of a man covered in burlap, 3 bloody newspapers lying nearby.
Okay, that's a rough Monday at work, folks.
Issues of the Pittsburgh Press and Cleveland Plain Dealer dated July 1933 were found, as I mentioned, nearby. It was clear the car was the crime scene because blood was everywhere. But this wasn't the first murder to happen in Pennsylvania. In early October of 1923, the decapitated body of 21-year-old Charles McGregor from Kittanning was discovered in a women's dressing room at one of Pittsburgh's municipal pools.
What? How does this? How?
In the dressing room of a swimming pool.
Yeah, how does it? There's got to be screaming, right? I mean, when I'm just trying to imagine.
Well, if it's early October, I'm imagining the pools are likely closed at this
missed.
time.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed the October part.
But he's found in the dressing room, and he's been decapitated, Dylan. His head was found later. And then, Dylan, in October of 1925, the decapitated body of a man is found in the West Pittsburgh swamp about 3/4 of a mile from the road. The man is believed to have been killed some 2 to 3 weeks before. His head was found later, prompting inquiries from more than half of the local residents in this area, who feared the corpse might belong to a missing relative or loved one. But in the end, no one was able to identify the man.
My gosh, that it seems to me, I'm no expert, that's a lot of decapitated murder victims in one place.
Just 11 days later, on October 17th of 1925, 4 men from West Pittsburgh find the decapitated skeleton of a man covered by a blue work shirt near where the previous remains were discovered. 3 others find a skull missing its lower jaw 2 days after that. 2 suits of men's clothing found near the scene are displayed in the window of the Cooper and Butler department store in Newcastle. but the identity of the headless skeleton is never found. So they, instead of, trying to identify him in some other way, they display these clothes, hoping someone can, make an ID based on clothing recognition.
Oh, I think that's pretty smart, actually. In that day and age, they were limited by their options. You know what I mean?
Some speculated the killings in Pennsylvania were gangland killings. The marsh had been a dumping ground for mobsters disposing of bodies. Law enforcement in Cleveland traveled to Newcastle to check out the murder site. Elliot Ness, his executive assistant, a man named John Flynn, was convinced the killer had been operating in both areas, or that this mad butcher from Cleveland was copying the Pennsylvania killer.
Yeah, and I'm sure they always worry about copycats when you have sensationalized stories like this.
Well, Cleveland and Pittsburgh are not really that far. There's not a great distance between the two.
Right.
Flynn's return to Cleveland with scant files fueled the antagonistic relationship between Elliot Ness and the Cleveland Police Department. Murillo, if you remember Detective Murillo from the first part of our story, he was sure the murders were committed by the same man. He felt the butcher had not only killed in the Newcastle area,
Right.
but had also killed in Ohio.
Yeah, and if those two areas are only, I don't know exactly how far, hour or two away from each other, or even 3, that's not that far of a distance to imagine that, someone could commit a murder here and then go and do it again, not that far away.
It was the local coroner in Cleveland, Coroner Pierce, who decided to hold a torso clinic on September 15th, in which 30 law enforcement officers, medical examiners, and others would meet to discuss every detail of the evidence collected so far. It was not quite a task force, but it gave the opportunity for accurate information to be shared among these investigators and the coroner and various folks who are tasked with solving the crime, but remember, none of them are working together, really.
Right, and there's a very logistical advantage to just having them in the same room and being able to talk and not have to go look for, each other in different places and things like that.
It was also possible that this might ease public concern that something was being done. By now, we are like 6 or 7 victims in. Police aren't really making any headway as far as finding a suspect.
No, and the newspaper they have worn this story out with the headlines, and they're just keeping it on the front page. So yeah, the pressure's starting to build on investigators.
Though not wildly successful in solving the murders, Pierce's conference did help provide some insight into the killer. Everyone agreed that it would take a large, powerful man to use a knife with such strength and to be able to cart the bodies into areas inaccessible by car. His ability to blend in meant he probably lived in the area or at least nearby. Also, the dismemberment was likely done in the surrounding area as well, because it's unlikely you would transport pieces of a body parts, miles and miles away to dispose of them.
Well, you got the body on one arm and you got the head under the other arm.
It was also believed the killer was a butcher or hunter. For some reason, most doctors that attended this torso clinic did not want to acknowledge the butcher might be one of their own. They did not want to admit that this could be a surgeon or a physician.
Or someone with some kind of medical training.
Yes.
They just won't even entertain the thought.
Yeah,
That's why they keep saying things like, well, there's he would have never used a saw. Well, if it's a killer crazy doctor, bruh, he may use a saw every time.
What if it was Dr. Giggles?
What if it's Dr. Giggles, bud?
I don't even think that guy had a medical license.
He was certainly not licensed to practice murder, but he did it anyway.
He had a license to kill.
Dr. Giggles.
There was no evidence that the killer knew of any of the victims. Like, they could not make any links, really. So at this point, they've decided this killer is hunting random victims.
Which makes it even harder to get a lead.
Well, and this was a time before we really understood serial killers.
Right.
And so the idea of a random killing that you could just be chosen out of a crowd, stalked, murdered, was almost like a foreign concept to many of these investigators.
Yeah, and to the public as well, I'm
because
sure.
the majority of crimes were, like a crime of passion. It was a jealousy, greed. I mean, there were motives for murder. It wasn't just because someone got their kicks.
Because someone's actually hunting human beings like animals.
Ness thought the decapitations might simply be to mask the identities of the victims and protect the killer in case someone had seen him with the deceased.
But many times the head's there as well.
Well,
near.
that's true, but this is Elliot Ness's theory.
Well, I understand.
Right?
Yeah.
Peter Murillo was more understanding that this might be a killer who enjoyed.
He just gets off cutting the
and
head.
that the heads might be
off.
trophies.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Some assume the killer was keeping the heads as trophies, like Peter Murillo and some others in the law enforcement community. It was agreed upon that the killer likely led a normal life by all outward appearances, that this would not be someone you would ever suspect, like a Gary Ridgway.
Yeah, and then
or a BTK.
This type of killing he's doing and then the decapitation, it's a big release for him. So it's very possible that he's able to seem very normal in his everyday life. And then he gets this big, enthusiastic, sick release when he does this to one of his victims.
From mid-September to October, Elliot Ness focused on bribery and other forms of corruption within the police department rather than hunt for the Phantom Butcher. Even though this is his assigned task, he's not really doing a whole lot. He doesn't really care. I mean, he doesn't really want to be in charge of this case.
Yeah.
John Flynn, Ness's executive assistant, suddenly resigns, like out of the blue. Flynn defended some of Ness's prime targets in the police probe, which made for an uncomfortable working environment because Ness is going after, officers and the higher ups in the police force, and this guy is friends with a lot of these people.
Right.
So they start to butt heads. So this isn't good. And then he just abruptly resigns. Murillo wasn't sad to see Flynn go. Murillo didn't care for Flynn, who he felt like had made some reckless comments because Flynn had said at one point to the press that they shouldn't solely be focusing on men, that the killer might be a woman. And Murillo was like, this is ridiculous.
There's no evidence to support that, period.
Murillo ridiculed this notion in his personal writings, saying the women would have, or the women or the woman would have to, quote, be a super Amazon.
Yes,
to be able to carry this out.
They're already saying it's a big, strong guy, basically. So that rules a lot of other men who aren't built like that out. But that's so ridiculous. And that's nothing against women. That's just being logical.
Right.
It's very unlikely that and there's a woman out there that can do it, but it's very unlikely.
And Peter Murillo, he's
no
the
evidence.
Lead detective on the case. He says there's absolutely no indication, no evidence whatsoever that would suggest the murderer is a female. And then you have Elliot Ness's assistant making statements to the press. Well, we don't know. This could be a woman.
Well, look.
He's just like, you guys are asshats. Like, get your heads out of your ass and pay attention to the details of the case. Like, are you even reading the case files here?
Yeah, for all we know, it could be kangaroos doing this.
For all we know, it could be a gang of clowns.
A gang of clowns or women or kangaroos. So don't just...
Or kangaroo clowns. You just never know.
A female kangaroo clown. Boom. There it is.
Go. Okay.
You can't focus solely on men, okay?
On the sly, Elliot Ness set up a private meeting with a Cleveland press editor named David Cowles. The paper was willing to put up money to solve the murders. So they're willing to fund almost like private investigations to help solve these crimes.
Oh, yeah, and I bet they wouldn't have any peeks at hot leads from the information gathered by the private investigator.
Well, the pair began to concoct a plan. Cowles thought the underworld would be a key connection to finding the killer. So he wanted to establish a group of 8 undercover men, mostly new graduates of the police academy, who would be paid by the newspaper. These men would infiltrate the city's shady underbelly and can do so without attention because no one knew the men were police officers because they're brand new to the force.
This is like a Scorsese movie or something, right?
Kind
He's
of.
he's going into the academy to get new, fresh recruits that the criminals don't know and haven't corrupted.
Oh, but the newspaper's paying for that? I mean, this would not fly today.
This is 21 Jump Street,
This
bro.
would never fly.
But the newspaper's paying for it.
Right.
No, it would never fly because you can never allow the public investigation, public duties to be filtered through a private business that has interest in information and making story. Yeah, it's not a good idea on many levels.
Nothing much is known about this shadow group or their activities. Only 3 men's identities have been learned over the years.
Oh my God, does it have a code name?
It seemed Ness was keeping the city's police out of the loop altogether. So the police department doesn't even know about this secret group of investigators that are being paid by an outside agency, the newspaper, to fund this investigation.
So they're actually they're letting them do it.
Elliot Ness
and
is
letting the
letting
newspaper fund it.
Elliot Ness is letting this happen.
I'm gonna give it code name Dragon Skin.
So the question is, did Elliot Ness doubt the effectiveness of the police department, his police department, since he is the safety director, he is overseeing this police department?
Right.
Or was he feeling pressure from the news media to find this killer, to catch the killer, and now he's got this newspaper offering him money to fund an investigation?
Well, at this point,
Or was this a way for him to make a bigger name for himself? Like if we do this and we catch the killer, I'm going to be the big hero here
maybe it's all those things
with
at
my
once.
genius idea.
Yeah, maybe it's all those at once. Maybe the department was limited in resources and money, and they were worried about if they could, afford some of these things they felt like they needed to do, or maybe it's just his ego. But I guess we'll never know. But it still seems very strange to me.
Well, there were 2 separate but parallel investigations going on. Ness shared little of his information with Murillo and the Cleveland Police Department. In the days following their appointment to the case, Murillo and his partner Zalewski began working on finding a black man who had been seen exposing himself around Kingsbury Run. They also wanted to check into tips that the crimes might be related to racketeering at the Northern Ohio food terminal. So they're following each and every lead they get, no matter how just asinine or over the top it might be.
Right. I think aliens did it. And not sharing information, we hear that all the time between organizations or whatever, FBI, local cops. But that may be because he wants credit. Both groups want credit for finding the killer, if you will. And it's just really dumb to not share information.
Well, like Murillo, he is checking up on every tip. And I gave these examples because in his heart of hearts, he kind of knew that this random flasher exposing himself
is not his killer.
Is probably not the torso killer.
He's already developed in his mind, even if it's his own personal profile and what he thinks the killer's like and all that. And this guy doesn't fit it for him because he's just a random kind of lower level deviant in his mind, I'm sure, like a peeping Tom.
But it was still worth checking out.
Yeah.
At this point. So just chasing down any lead. Prostitutes reported being frightened by a certain John who had asked multiple sex workers, by the way, to singe his chest hair, like to burn his chest hair.
That's an abnormal request.
And pretend they were stabbing him during sexual encounters.
Again, that's different. That's going to stand out. And just hearing those 2 behaviors, the police or anyone, is going to automatically make you be like, whoa, that's weird, right? I mean, that's beyond kink, and I would think, right? I mean, even in the world of kink and BDS, or is it BTS? BDSM? Wait, one of those is a Korean boy band.
Yeah.
Never mind. It's S&M.
The young girls are into BTS, yes.
BTSMD.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. EMD, BTS, WXYZ.
I love sugar. But anyway.
We know.
No, my daughter really
We
liked
know
that
your
group.
K-pop bands. We know you love them.
Anyway, yeah, that's going to stand out, and that's something you're going to remember. Well, you set me on my chest on fire and stab me while we do it.
Another tip that had rolled in, they investigated, was a 36-year-old former slaughterhouse worker who was arrested for chasing his neighbor with an axe. So again, any tip, right? They're looking into it, but nothing ever comes from these tips. They're dead ends. They don't go anywhere. They are able to track these people down, like the guy who liked to have his chest hair burned off or whatever.
Right.
And they determine, okay, this is not the killer.
He's like, don't shame me.
Exactly.
Don't kink shame me, man.
This is a guy who has a particular set of interests.
Will you care if I set my chest hair on fire and get pantomime stabbed while I have sex with a prostitute?
I'm going to make an admission right here on Mountain Murders for the first time. Okay. Nothing turns me on quite like the smell of singed hair.
Chest loaves.
Yeah.
A loaf of chest
God,
hair.
I love some burning hair. It really gets me in the mood.
Just smoldering. A nice smoky fire.
You know what? I have to say, after living a long life, Dylan, the last few months, I've learned a lot more about some of my friends than I ever need to know.
It's true.
And I've realized that the world is much more vivid and
diverse
and interesting. And there's an array of kinks out there.
There are.
And the people you would never expect are into some of the most creative stuff, right? And I must live a very sheltered life. I've come to realize we're very boring and vanilla, and I'm okay with that.
But I like boring, and I don't think we're vanilla. I think we might be like old chocolate swirl or something. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm just saying, compared to people who want their chest hair burned off, and they want you to pretend you're stabbing them.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say I'm okay with being boring.
You know, I'll give anything a shot. Most anything a shot once. So we're gonna try that later.
I will try it 2 or 3 times just to make sure I don't like it.
I'm going to put fake hair on my chest.
It's true. Well, you can burn off my chest hair. You
Okay.
can burn off this one long nipple hair.
Yeah. It's going to go up like a candle wick.
Just kidding. I don't have a long nipple hair. I already burned it off.
Stop.
Okay.
That's great.
Police checked local laundry services, assuming the killer would be covered in blood after the murders and at some point would need to wash his or her clothing, right?
Yeah, do you have any customers that keep sending you full sets of bloody clothes
Yeah.
over and over again? Oh, you have 7 customers that do that. Okay, I'm going to need all those names.
Law enforcement stopped and checked cars driving late at night in the early morning hours to see if it was a killer dumping a body, especially if they were around Kingsbury Run.
Yeah, I know. So you do have to get the body there somehow, at least close in a car, right? So that means you're driving around with a body, which is so weird to me.
Murillo canvassed the area slaughterhouses, checking into butchers to see if anything seemed out of ordinary. Like, hey, this particular butcher has been walking around wearing another man's head. Maybe he's the killer. I don't know.
The one that, old Joe that wears people's faces.
Yes.
You think it might be him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said he liked to get heads, but I never knew what that meant until I went to his house, and he has a whole bunch of heads.
He take roadhead to a whole nother
He told me
level.
he loved head. Police went undercover as hobos, descending into the darkness of night, hoping to catch a glimpse of something out of the ordinary. Investigators and patrolmen continued their strong presence in the Kingsbury Run neighborhood. Murillo volunteered to go underground, meaning undercover. He would dress up as a vagrant and work the transient population, but the police chief refused, saying it was too dangerous. And eventually he's going to get his wish, but we'll talk about that later.
Well, he doesn't want his lead detective.
Look, I have a great picture of Detective Murillo dressed like a hobo.
Really?
And he's got the little... I'm so excited.
He ain't got
He's
the
got
little
a
sack.
poke.
He got a poke sack.
He's got a little stick, and he's got his little bandana handkerchief tied up on the end. He's
Okay.
got a little poke. Yeah.
I'm going to go underground with the mole people and find out what's happening.
I'm going to go underground with Mark Zuckerberg in his like $10 billion underground.
Oh, you're talking about all the super bunkers, all the rich elite building?
Yeah, it's
all of
interesting.
a sudden,
Suddenly in 2023, all the rich people decided to build these, amazing
mega structures under their
bunker.
properties.
It's almost like they know something is going to happen in 2024. What could it be?
It's weird.
On February 23rd of 1937, a blistering winter day, 55-year-old Robert Smith, not to be confused with the singer of The Cure, though I can imagine in 1937, this guy walking around with his goth makeup, he would look amazing. So Smith went down to Lake Erie to check a sailboat. He was going to go check on a boat that he'd stored for the winter, just to make sure everything is okay with this boat.
Yeah, you got to go check it out, see if there's any damage.
Right. So he wandered along the beach looking for some driftwood to burn. 2 years earlier, his neighbor Frank Lagasse had made the similar trek, if you recall. Around 1:40 p.m., Smith saw a white object offshore. At first, he thought it was the body of a dog or a sheep, but soon realized he was looking at a human or human remains. The torso had washed up on the beach. No one had planted it there, so it had come from the lake. Police theorized the body was placed in the water somewhere between Beulah Park and Lakewood. A couple storm sewers emptied into the lake nearby, but snow and ice prevented any immediate search of those. So 3 days later, Murillo and his team would spend 10 days searching the city sewers, trying to find other body parts.
Wow.
But all they have is this torso. So the female torso had fair skin and light brown hair. The pathologist noted she was a city dweller based on the condition of her lungs.
Really?
Not sure what that means.
No, they got better air in the city?
I don't think so.
Oh, he can tell she's been around pollution.
I guess so.
Wow. Damn, okay, that seems like an advanced.
Either that or she'd been hitting the crack pipe really hard.
Or she said she has "I live in New York" tattooed on her stomach.
She was between 25 to 35 years old, and she weighed about 120 pounds. He estimated her height between 5'6" and 5'8". The dismemberment had been accomplished with a big, heavy knife, similar to like a butcher knife, is what he speculated. The cuts bore hesitation marks. She had been dead somewhere between 2 to 4 days. It was determined that the victim was dead when her head had been removed. There was a disagreement whether she was the victim of the torso killer. The skill didn't seem to be like on the same level as the other dismemberments.
As far as precision and all that.
Yes.
And there were no hesitation marks on many of those victims.
Right. And she was dead when decapitated, and they knew from the previous autopsies that the killer seemed to want to decapitate victims while they were still alive.
Yes.
Police were reluctant to add her to the torso case. There were 2 missing women in the area who might match the victim, but one of those women popped up alive later. On February 25th, Murillo received a letter from a pastor who tipped him off about an abortion farm on Lakeshore Boulevard. Law enforcement was ordered to search the area, trying to see if they could locate this place. They thought maybe that had something to do with the torso killing.
I've never been a fan of genetically modified abortions. So some farms, I'm just not going to be a big fan.
Yeah, I agree.
Man, I'm killing it tonight. Abortion farms.
I was just actually thinking of all the soil and everything that you need to farm some abortions. It just sounds like a lot.
Organic abortions is the ones I would pick if I had to pick one.
I'll
stop saying it.
A day earlier, an employee of Euclid Beach Park noted seeing 2 men in a small boat about 1,000 yards offshore, which he found odd considering the time of year. It was not a time of year when people would be boating on Lake Erie. It was on the Saturday that Smith found the torso that he had seen these 2 men out on this boat, maybe as if they were tossing something in the water.
Oh, wow.
Murillo and Zalewski found 2 zigzag trails of blood beginning on Lakeshore Boulevard and ending close to Erie Shore. However, a newsboy later came forward stating he'd seen a dog hit by a car and he watched the dog limp back and forth, leaving this blood trail. But Murillo did not want to accept the dog story even after finding its owner.
Really?
He was convinced that this was human blood and it had come from the victim, and just kind of kept investigating this area even after they found the owner and the dog has been hit by a car.
Well, they're trying very, very hard. All out, multiple task force, even secret 21 Jump Street task force. Johnny Depp's working on it, and Holly Robinson, and Richard Grieco later on. And they're just dying to find something, and now he's got blood. So, his blood's boiling, and his probably adrenaline is like, oh, wow, we're finally maybe on the trail of something. Turns out, unfortunately, a dog got hit.
I refuse to believe it's a dog.
Which is, I'm glad it's dog blood, not human blood, but I still feel bad that the poor dog got hit.
I know.
Does that make sense?
Despite little movement in solving the torso killings, the investigation did solve 20 other cases and managed to get about a dozen disturbed individuals off the street and into asylums. Almost 3 months later, a concessionaire at the Great Lakes Expo named Howard Yoakum was testing a swan boat when he found the lower half of a woman's torso in the lake just off East 30th Street. It matched the upper half, which had been found in February.
Wow.
The lower half had been preserved remarkably well by the cold waters of Lake Erie. Due to currents, it was believed the two halves were tossed into water at the same time, just maybe in different places. None of the other body parts would be found, and the woman's identity remains unknown to this day. I would be curious if they would be able to go in and do some DNA testing.
Yeah, I know.
Genetic
I wonder what kind of
testing nowadays.
evidence is available or part of, this investigation. That'd be very interesting.
A few months later, on June 6th of 1937, 14-year-old Russell Lauer was riding a bus on his way home from a movie. That's when he spotted a group of people on the bank of the Cuyahoga River. 2 days earlier, a tugboat crew member had been lost in the water, and the Coast Guard was still dragging the river looking for this tugboat member, right? So this boy is like, this is kind of interesting. He gets off the bus. He goes over. He's watching the Coast Guard do their thing. And, after about 20 minutes of watching this, he walks through a barren field known as Stone's Levee, which was also a bit of a trash dumping ground. Under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge, Lauer spotted something jutting out from dirt under some refuse. As he got closer, he realized he was looking at a whole human skull.
Man, that would freak me out, dude.
Yeah.
That would be so very disturbing.
It would be, and then part of me would be like, no, I found a skull. I want to put it on my mantle.
But that would
But
be
I would
the
be
wrong
conflicted.
thing to do. No, you would have to.
Look, Dylan, loving you is wrong, but I don't want to be right.
Heather's like, look, she gives the investigators her phone number. She's like, look, if nobody collects a skull in like 2 years and you're done with your investigation, hit me up.
I'll just slide like a $5 bill over and be like, let's make this happen. As police assembled in the area for a search, they quickly found a heavy white wool cap with a tassel, the sleeve of a woman's dress, and what they thought was a curly black toupee. As they dug around the area of the skull, a burlap bag with white powder and rotting twine was found. Inside was a human skeleton missing arms and legs, along with a large piece of black tissue-like material. Yet no one was sure if this was another torso victim. The following day, the coroner confirmed the link to the torso killer. So this becomes another body.
So he goes over the remains and sees enough similarities to say, yes, I think it's connected.
Yes, although the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, Dylan, there were definite knife marks and evidence of hacking and cutting on the vertebra. The skull and pelvis were determined to belong to a petite African-American woman who was maybe about 5 feet tall and weighed somewhere around 100 pounds and was believed to be between 30 to 40 years old.
So there's been a few victims fall in that category right there as far as height, weight.
Yeah, I mean, most of the women who are killed are of a, they're like they're 30s, 40s.
Yeah.
They're not young females. The toupee was actually part of the victim's scalp.
Wow.
So what they thought was a toupee is really the real deal.
It's just really the hair from this left over from the remains.
Which is creepy.
That is creepy, but I guess if you think about it, if it's not, in the dirt, it could very well be preserved like that. It's weird.
It was believed the woman had been dead for about a year. The powder material that was on the burlap sack, they learned was lime.
Ah, yes.
It had proved fruitless trying to identify the other bodies, and this would be tough too, considering it was skeletal remains. Yet they had 3 gold crowns and bridge work in the upper left side of the skull. Law enforcement combed missing persons files looking for anyone missing that had prominent dental work. They eventually found a woman that they thought matched the bill. Her name was Rose Wallace, and she disappeared in August of 1936, which was at odds with the coroner's estimate about time of death. 10 months later, after they find the body, a young man shows up and claims, after reading through the records, that it was his mother, Rose Wallace.
Oh, okay.
With the Wallace murder, Murillo began digging into the timeline with usual tenacity. It was the first time in the series of killings that he was able to uncover threads connecting the victims. Wallace was reportedly going to a party on the west side near where victim Andrassy had lived. Wallace had maintained a steady relationship with a man known as One-Armed Willie.
Oh, dude. I wish I was known as One-Armed
Well,
Willie.
he was Willie and he had one arm.
Well, yeah, it's
Which,
the best.
Dylan, when I lived in Norfolk, I had a neighbor that was One-Armed Willie.
Really?
Yes.
And he was a Willie with one arm.
He was a Willie and he had one arm.
Well, I almost said that's awesome. I'm sure he would rather have his arm back.
A man, this One-Armed Willie guy was a man that Flo Polillo, one of the only other identified victims, had been seen arguing with the day before she was killed in January of 1936.
No way.
Like Polillo, Wallace was a part-time sex worker, and she had actually vanished from a bar, which was one of the last places Polillo was seen. This was one of the last places she's seen, the same bar. So Murillo's able to kind of make some of these connections. It's kind of the first big break as far as being able to nail down, hey, some of these people knew each other. They ran in the same circles. They go to the same bars.
Or even if you get an idea for how the killer may be getting introduced to his victims, or, is he picking them up if they're working on the street, or is he meeting them somewhere? Is he going to a bar? Whatever. So this could be a very big piece of information.
Summer of 1937 brought other problems to Cleveland. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee and Republic Steel, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, and Inland Steel had failed to reach a recognition over a newly formed union. So a strikebreaker attack occurred on union headquarters and a soup kitchen in Cleveland. So this whole thing starts happening.
So the workers are on strike because they couldn't come to a collective bargaining agreement, it sounded like, or it may have been a newly formed union.
It was a newly formed union.
And so they've sent in, the company has sent in thugs with big sticks and such and brutal tactics to just literally break the backs of the workers.
Right. So this is happening.
That's not pretty.
No.
That's a bad situation.
The mayor had to call in the National Guard to maintain order. So it's a big deal. On July 6th, the 147th Infantry that were maintaining position at Republic Steel near the Flats, it was around 5:30 a.m. that a private named John Smith saw something white bobbing in the Cuyahoga River. Around the same time, another private, Edgar Steinbrecher, walked onto the West 3rd Bridge to watch a tugboat, and he recognized the lower half of a male torso floating in the dirty water. No one contacted law enforcement until around 10 a.m. for some reason. Private Charles Demenzi saw a floating burlap bag which contained the upper half of a torso. A motorboat belonging to the Coast Guard was dispatched to retrieve the lower half of the torso. A patrolman happened to find a right thigh lodged in a bridge piling and other body parts, including a left thigh, left lower leg, and upper left arm.
Wow.
In the river. And they were all located in different places like around the same time.
No, dude.
So different people working the river
Right.
are finding body parts, but it's all in like the same time period
I believe.
within a few hours.
What do you think I think I know what just happened. The remains have been spotted very quickly after being put in, and they've recovered maybe a whole body almost.
The upper half of the torso had been wrapped in 3-week-old newspapers. The burlap sack had a red writing across stating it contained 100 pounds of chicken feed. Now remember, Dylan, we found chicken feathers. They were in the bucket of blood.
There was a bunch of chicken feathers.
We found chicken feathers in quite a few of the crime scenes in and around. The bag also held a woman's silk stocking with a long black and white dog hair, like attached to the stocking.
Okay.
Of some dog that obviously had a bit of length to its fur, right?
So the dog was wearing stockings. Interesting. That could be a very big piece of information.
Maybe, and a few blonde human hairs. So all we need to do is find a blonde who has a dog that wears silk stockings.
No, I'm being goofy, but they're finding actual evidence, right? I mean, they must be getting kind of excited about
Yeah,
this.
it's just a damn shame they didn't have the forensics that are available today.
Yeah, but I mean, still, you know that the killer could be near or live with or be around a dog, a black and white dog. I mean, it could, more information than you had.
Police speculated the killer had dumped the body into the river, hoping it would drift out to the lake. Detectives continued searching the waters, but all that was retrieved was a piece of lung, like after they found these other body parts.
Oh, my gosh.
I know.
This body has been cut up into many pieces.
Just, oh, hey, here's a lung.
This killer is sadistic.
I just don't want to find a lung, Dylan.
Well, no, I don't want to find any of this.
I don't know about the other parts, but the idea of just a random lung, I don't know why that's like the bucket of blood. Like, that's just a no for me.
It's a step too far
I
for
don't
you.
even want to know what a lung looks like. A day later, the two forearms with hands attached were found, which could at least maybe give the option of identification. For a week, searches for more body parts dragged on, eventually turning up a right upper arm on July 10th and a right lower leg on the 14th. But no head was ever found.
Still, this is the most intact body they've found to date, as far as I know.
The victim was a well-built man around 40, between 5'8" and 5'10", and they guesstimated about 160 pounds. The killer left the genitals intact on this body. There were 2 scars, one along the right thumb and another cross-shaped on the left leg. The coroner noted the level of violence and savagery was increasing. The abdominal cavity had been wrenched open. The killer had split the chest and removed the heart. None of the missing organs were recovered. The neck had more hacking. The coroner described it as hacking than the other torso victims. There were multiple hesitation marks, and it suggested the killer's knife might be dulling.
And maybe if it is the same killer through all these victims, they're kind of having to not, go one up to get bigger and bigger thrill. Now, maybe if they start into the gutting the victim, and now I don't know. Does it seem like escalation to you, or does it?
Well, it almost seems more frenzied.
Yeah. Okay.
Like maybe this is a killer who's losing his grip a little bit.
Right, it's less calculated.
Well, I think about like
controlled.
Ted Bundy, and he had been very calculated, and he had been very controlled,
and careful,
right, with all of his murders. But it was after he escaped and went to Florida. Remember the attack on the sorority? That's when he kind of was like in this frenzied, just sort of throwing caution to the wind with what he was doing.
It was like a Viking berserker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like everything that all the rules or whatever he'd put in place for himself just went out the window. And I think maybe that's what's starting to happen here, is that you have a killer who is escalating and starting to maybe lose grip a little bit.
Well, yeah, because let's be honest, you're hunting and hacking up humans, so you don't have that great of a grip on everything in the first place. So, yeah, maybe it is escalating his own problems in his head and stuff, yeah.
And maybe this fear of being caught, the pressure, he's doing this in a bit of a hurry, that kind of thing, like speeding it up because he feels like any minute he's going to get busted.
Well, I mean,
I don't know.
with all this investigating and all the way the story is very sensational and everyone's talking about it, the fact that you keep killing in this atmosphere with all this extra patrols and things like that is pretty wild, which I guess it kind of shows you how much it means to these killers. They don't just stop and decide they don't want to do it anymore. It's almost like they have to do it.
They have no self-control.
They need to do it. They don't care.
They're unhinged. On the evening that this 9th victim was discovered, Dylan, a 54-year-old drunk alarmed customers at a bar near East 9th and Hamilton by insisting he had firsthand knowledge of the torso killer. The man scared 3 different women by telling them he knew who the killer was, like he knew how to find him, and was just kind of making all these really weird, creepy statements until these ladies called the police. The man was arrested, but police eventually learned that he was just drunk rambling.
Right.
But it's like on the very day they find a body, you got this crazy old man.
I know who the killer is.
I'm the killer.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I'm going to kill that bottle of Jim Beam right there.
In August, between 100 to 200 coroners from all over the United States attended a conference of the National Association of Coroners at Cleveland's Carter Hotel. They were asked to look at the case files and detect any pattern the local coroners might have missed, but nothing much was revealed during this attempt. I mean, they all saw the same things, and they didn't really have any conclusion other than, yes, someone is dismembering these bodies.
There's no revelations. There's no new information or insights.
Right. Official Detective Stories, which was a national true crime publication at the time, and we know how popular these true crime papers, magazines, like pulp stories were super popular. This magazine offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the torso killer. The magazine wanted, in return, exclusive rights to the story. This led to even more tips pouring in, with one writer speculating the killer was, quote, a diseased prostitute. Because, again, that makes sense.
It's a very specific type of prostitute.
A diseased one, yes.
Why? Well, okay, so tell us you hate women without telling us you hate women. I mean, seriously. Like, it didn't even say just a prostitute, a diseased prostitute.
This is probably coming from a man who caught a disease.
Yes, because he was stepping out on his wife, cheating, and probably called chlamydia.
Paying too many women's, exactly. After the discovery of victim number 9, Murillo and Zalewski pursued suspects who fell into 3 categories. Skeezy characters around the run.
Okay.
Specific names that were brought to their attention through tips and whatever. And doctors who behaved suspiciously.
Oh my gosh.
Based on the idea, killers often return to their crime scene. A pair of detectives were tasked with making frequent patrols of Kingsbury Run. These sweeps were typically at the end of the day because they felt like the killer would be operating in the darkness.
Right, and not just a patrolman doing another ride through as he goes in, but detectives.
Pairs of them.
Pairs
yes.
of detectives, because they're more familiar with the case. They know a little bit more of what they're looking for, possibly.
And no matter how absurd the tip, everything had to be investigated. I mean, everything. Sorting through these tips was time consuming, and the tips ran the gamut from ridiculous to downright frightening. One tip led Murillo to, quote, a feeble-minded man who bought a chicken once or twice a week, then paid a sex worker to cut its head off while he masturbated.
Oh, okay.
Again, very specific fetish.
Well, there was chicken feathers. I think they actually could have had legs on it, that lead.
The chicken or the feather or the lead?
The lead.
Or the penis
and the
that
chicken.
He was masturbating with.
It has legs on it, too.
Yes. The John then requested that the bloody knife be run across his neck.
Do you have to pay extra for this?
I don't know.
Okay.
Despite the depravity the sex workers witnessed daily, this was by far the most disturbing for most of these women. This guy was not arrested for the murders after he was interviewed, but this is just an example of what police were working with.
From goofy to, scary.
Well, just some random person. I think it's a diseased prostitute.
Right.
Which is like, wow, that's a really creative lead. So detailed. Do you have a name?
But even this feeble-minded man, in their words to describe him, he was still able to function and afford chickens and pay for prostitutes. So, I mean, if you're not, you should be out there living your best life, because look what this man's doing with his. Because I've got to imagine, in his mind, he's living his best life.
Very disturbing stuff. By August of 1938, as I mentioned, tips were just pouring in, but there started to be a lot of tips regarding the city's undertakers. And police started to pay close attention to these tips. They thought an undertaker would have access to sharp instruments and have anatomy knowledge. They were equipped with tools for dealing with a bloody corpse, such as rubber sheets, lifting harnesses, and they would have access to people who were maybe down and out.
So they have the, legally and within reason, they have the facilities to actually, handle bodies, if you will.
Yes.
And they have the knowledge, and they're not bothered by dead bodies.
Right. And you would have a space, like a workspace.
And all the tools.
Where no one would find it strange at all if you were in there dissecting a body. You could say, oh, I'm just doing an altar. I'm just an undertaker.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. That's a pretty wild thought.
Physicians and doctors were also targeted kind of during this period of the investigation. Murillo looked into several doctors who were rumored to be drug addicts, those who lost their license to practice, and those who had clients of questionable character. But of course, this went nowhere. But I'm just trying to give you guys a broad view of everything that's being done.
They're trying everything.
They're like, hey, we're going to investigate a chicken farmer who had rope at one point in his truck.
Right.
And maybe has a knife at home.
They're throwing all the shit at the wall.
They are trying their hardest to find something.
Yes.
Something
that sticks.
Although this was an exceptionally violent period of time, law enforcement was not able to handle these complex investigations. And we are seeing that play out during this reign of the Cleveland Torso Killer, right? It seemed, despite investigating each lead, there was no way of solving the murders. I mean, unless they catch somebody red-handed in the act, I mean, they're just like, we don't know what to do here. We're just chasing our tails.
Right.
On April 8th of 1938, a 35-year-old WPA worker named Steve Morosky was walking down the hill at the end of Superior Avenue. When he got down to a storm drain, he noticed something floating in the water. At first, he thought it was a dead fish, but after poking it, and we've learned, Dylan, you never poke it. You never poke it, Dylan. He realized, to his horror, it was the lower half of a human leg, amputated between the knee and ankle.
Oh, my gosh.
After 9 months, the butcher had struck again. So that's a pretty decent cooling off period.
Well, it is. It is. And there's all this stuff going on, all this buzz and all the, and it seemed maybe that is why, because, the pressure is tightening up, or maybe he's scared he's going to get caught. So he's trying to wait longer.
During examination, 6 long blonde hairs were found sticking to the leg. The coroner suspected the leg belonged to a female. Investigators combed the area up and down the Cuyahoga River looking for other body parts. Of the people who were questioned along the river, workers, just various people, no one had seen anything unusual. The autopsy revealed crude knife marks, which suggested the killer was in a hurry. The limb had been in the water no more than 72 hours.
Wow.
By the end of the month, Ness's assistant was looking into a woman's dismembered body found in Lake Ontario, trying to decide if she was part of the Cleveland series. This body held evidence of being treated with chemicals and being wrapped in burlap or cheesecloth for a short period of time before being tossed in the lake. So this could potentially be another victim, but some miles away. Murillo and Zalewski were beginning to feel overwhelmed and fatigued as they had been full-time on this case for 2 years. The pair investigated every lead, no matter how trivial. We've talked about this.
Man, that's a long time.
The men who'd maintained a good working relationship had an argument over a former friend of the victim, Andrassy, and wondered whether this guy should be questioned or put under surveillance. This minor argument escalated into a full-blown quarrel, and after that, their working relationship never recovered.
Well, I mean, that just right there shows you the stress of this situation, and it's been a long time, and they've seen so much crazy stuff and tried to run down all these leads. And I don't think it really mattered.
Yeah, it's really starting to take a toll on them.
The minor argument
On their
didn't
lives,
mean,
their personal lives, their working relationship. They've been working together so closely for 2 years. They're probably just tired of looking at each other.
Yeah, it's like when you
high
go
stress.
to your best friend's house for a long weekend, and when you get over there, you're like, this is going to be the greatest weekend ever. And like midday through Saturday, you hate each other, and you like have to call your mom to come get you.
I was going to say, what are you, 12?
And then, yeah.
Because in my adult life, this doesn't happen.
Well, no. Well, it hasn't happened in my. I'm talking about when you're a kid and you go to your besties for the long weekend.
As an adult, when I go to my besties for a long weekend, we're both excited that our husbands are gone and we can hang out.
Yeah, I know. No, and then you don't talk to each other Sunday, and then by Monday, you're best friends again. That's how it happens.
Yeah, I feel like that happened to me a few times.
And so they're just over being around each other.
Fourth grade was hard, bud.
There's been a lot of, I'm sure, long days and working weekends and, round the clock, just getting phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning because somebody thought they saw something under a bridge. I mean, I could only imagine that. And I'm surprised that they made it this far together without burning out. 2 years is a long time.
Ness also created a rift when he told the press his assistant, Robert Chamberlain, the new one, because remember his old assistant just abruptly retired or resigned. His new assistant had been working behind the scenes on the case. Chamberlain made comments questioning the coroner's work, which caused the coroner to become angry. And who wouldn't be angry if their professional competence was called into account? I think most people would not be okay if someone's in the press saying, well, the coroner's not really good at his job.
Well, and they can be viewed as deflecting or, put me on blast in the public. If you have an issue with me, come professionally and personally and let's discuss it. Let's not do it in the papers. And I think that's unprofessional and totally inappropriate.
Well, Chamberlain told the press that this newly discovered piece of leg that they find, it's cut below the knee, between the knee and the ankle, that this leg might have belonged to a previous victim.
Ah, yes.
However, anyone in their right mind, you don't have to be a scientist, a doctor, a coroner to know the difference between a fresh limb and one that had been in the river for over a year.
Yeah.
So he's trying to say, well, this is an old leg. This is off a body from, 9 months to a year ago.
That's,
whoa. And the coroner's like, don't question me. That is an old leg. That is not an old leg. This is a new leg.
Well, yeah, that's ridiculous.
Like you would be able to tell the difference.
Well, that's no less ridiculous than saying, well, it could be women that killed him. Could be a woman.
Well, these statements were taken, people were taking this as like, okay, well, Elliot Ness has a lot of pressure. His department does. So we're trying to point fingers at the coroner, at anybody. It's someone else's fault that we don't have this solved. It's because the coroner in town is terrible.
Deflecting.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you can see, this is just falling apart, bud. Within a month, on May 2nd, a call came into police. A bridge captain named Oscar Meister, which I wanted to laugh because I was like, oh, his name's Oscar Meyer, and another man named Albert Mahaffey saw a human thigh floating near the West 3rd Bridge, about 50 feet away from the bridge. Under the bridge, water was searched, and there they located a burlap bag. It was from Wheel Brand Potatoes, which was located in Bangor, Maine. The bag contained both halves of a headless torso, another thigh, a left foot, and all of these were severely decomposed. The body parts belonged to a female, with the foot matching the lower left leg found a month earlier.
Jeez, it's like some sick jigsaw puzzle.
The torso had a scar from a cesarean operation. However, this was pretty common. So law enforcement was like, well, we don't know really if that's going to help us match up a victim. There were multiple hesitation marks, yet with a viciousness, the coroner described. Lacerations on both thighs existed, and the killer had snapped the back ribs with his bare hands. For the first time in the series of murders, drugs were detected in the victim's system. There was enough morphine to cause either unconsciousness or death.
Oh, wow.
And they said, she had probably been dead for about a month, which explained this leg a month earlier that they thought was maybe a 72-hour period. So that makes sense, this whole window of time. The exact cause of death was unknown, but there was a lack of blood in the heart, the coroner noted. Law enforcement thought finding the head was the best bet in identifying the victim, and they spent some days searching for the head, but of course they didn't find it.
So is that to kind of say that maybe the body was drained of its blood, with the heart being empty of blood and all? Now, granted, it's rather decomposed and all that.
I don't know, Dylan.
Okay. And it was in the water, so who knows?
I'm not sure. I'm not a medical professional.
You're not?
I probably couldn't even show you where the heart is located in the body. I would just take a guess.
You would just point at like somebody's elbow. You'd be like, is it there? Is it the right elbow?
That's a spleen, honey.
No,
well, I don't know.
That's where your kidneys are. Everybody knows that.
A 42-year-old laborer was fishing on May 8th when his line got snagged. He pulled several strands of women's hair, like, off the hook. Like, when he finally got the hook, dislodged, there's just some long hairs on it.
Is that the second time that we've had hair on a fishing line in this story?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
He pulled up several strands of women's hair, as I mentioned. Investigators along the Coast Guard went to the spot on the lake where he'd been fishing to search, but they didn't find anything. Then on the early afternoon of August 16th, 3 African-American men who earned a meager living by scavenging for scrap metal and junk were searching through a dump close to the southwest corner of Lakeshore Drive and East 9th Street. And this is where most of the garbage from the Great Lakes Expo had been discarded.
Okay.
James Dawson left his companions to go get their truck, and on the way he passed by a gully and saw what looked like a coat sticking out from some rocks. He climbed down in the 5-foot depression, and there were some broken pieces of concrete and rocks in there until he realized the coat was actually a neat bundle covered with rocks. He pushed a few rocks away, then recoiled when the smell hit him. So very strong, foul odor. He calls for his buddies to join him, and they began uncovering rocks that were, kind of covering the bundle. Some of them were kind of heavy. They saw what looked like human bones. So by 4:30 p.m., a large group of investigators had gathered at this dump site. Despite the other bodies, this scene still came as a shock to investigators.
Well, I guess so.
It's like no matter, you're never going to fully be able to see these scenes and not be like, what the hell, right?
Yeah, yes.
Under the chunks of rock and concrete was a human torso wrapped in heavy brown paper, the kind used by butchers. Then, in a man's torn summer coat, so it's wrapped in this brown paper, then it's wrapped in a summer coat, then wrapped in a tattered quilt. So it's extra wrapped, Dylan. It's a bundle.
It sounds, I was going to say, this sounds a lot like a bundle.
It's very bundled.
I feel like it's bundled up.
Jammed among the rocks was another package wrapped in the same brown paper that contained thighs that were held together with a rubber band.
Dude, this is actual butcher paper around this, bro.
Yes. And so the thought was, is this a butcher who has access to butcher paper, or did the killer make like an effort to go buy butcher paper to wrap a body to fuck with us?
Right. Or out of necessity, because it works. It catches the blood and stuff of the pieces of meat, man.
5 feet away lay another wrapped package containing a severed head with light brown hair The hair was about 6 inches long from the scalp. The arms and lower legs were found in a brown cardboard box that had been fashioned from 2 separate containers, like 2 separate boxes, and they had been fitted together to make a big box.
These boxes will come together and make Boxtron.
For the first time since victim number 5, the killer had left the whole body behind. The boxes appeared to be in new condition, but the body was severely decomposed to the point the coroner couldn't tell if the organs had been removed or if they had putrefied. I don't know about you, Dylan, but I don't want to think about putrefied organs. Just saying.
I don't want to think about putrefied anything, really, honestly.
Parts of the skin were described as being mummified, and one of the coroners wondered if the pieces had been frozen at some point before being dumped. The remains were female. A few pieces of evidence were found, including the burlap bags, a label from the coat in which one of the bodies had been bundled in, a page from the March 5th, 1938 issue of Collier's magazine. A crowd gathered at the scene, and it was so huge this day that they find the body, and the following day people have come back and it's even bigger crowd, that police had to start dispersing onlookers because there's just so many. Remember in the first episode we talked about cars backing up for half a mile both ways trying to catch a glimpse of...
You said thousands of people have been said to have come through there?
Yeah. So again, too many people. We got to run them off. The only clues to the woman's identity found by the coroner were porcelain Davis crown pivot tooth in the upper jawline and an irregular deformed big toenail on the left foot. Otherwise, there was little to report. A thumbprint was unsuccessfully taken by a patrolman. The victim appeared to be maybe between 30 to 40 years old, 64 inches tall, and they estimated she had been dead about 4 to 6 months. The head was removed at the 3rd invertebral disc. On the same day, a man named Todd Bartholomew and his wife joined the onlookers that were crowded trying to check it out. He parked behind a billboard and joined the others at a large pipe. Bartholomew began smelling a foul odor near a shallow depression in the ground. When he looked into it, he saw human bones. Quickly, the case jumped from victim 11 to number 12.
My gosh. This is one of those stories, more than once.
Same day, we're finding more bodies.
Multiple victims found in the same dumping grounds.
Oh, yeah. The pelvis, ribs, and vertebrae of a human were found lying on the ground next to a can. And I don't know what kind of can, if it was a coffee can.
Is it metal?
A soup can.
Is it plastic?
It was just described as a can.
Was it a big can or a little can?
The can actually contained a human skull. So it had to be sizable enough to fit a head in, right?
So you're going to assume it was a complete head when it went in the can.
Yeah.
And then it turned into a skull.
Probably.
So this would be a big can if my head was in it.
Well, I'm thinking maybe one of those large cans of vegetables.
Oh,
like
my head
that
couldn't
you can
go
buy,
in there.
like the big cans.
I don't think my head would go in a gallon can, bud.
But I don't know. It could be, I don't know, maybe a big can of oil. I don't know.
Oh, my God. I'm looking at your little head right now. I think the big vegetable can would fit over your head.
Probably.
I got a cool little head.
Thank you.
I have a huge head.
The examination noted the bones were an incomplete male, probably white, between 30 to 40 years old, 66 to 68 inches tall, and weighing somewhere between 135 and 150 pounds.
See, there's the male and female victims are on the petite side.
Yeah, so that seems
that?
like a killer is trying to maybe target thin people.
Well, I mean, it's just maybe easier to move the body.
But I also think maybe back then people were just thinner.
Well, I think that's true to a degree, but a male, 125 to 140 is fairly kind of a smaller guy.
Well, yeah, but this is also during the Great Depression.
You think everybody was tiny?
People was hungry.
Oh, you think he was just skinny?
Well, I think people were skinny, and I also think we just as a population were much thinner back then. Okay.
There's a bunch of tiny people back then.
Yeah.
I would have ruled.
Well, they didn't have all the preservatives and fast food that we do now, Dylan.
I think maybe the victim's targeting people of a
You
smaller
mean you
size.
think the killer is targeting
I'm
small
sorry.
people?
Yes, because they know that the killer knows what they want to do with the body, and I think that's going to make it easier if it's a male or female on the smaller side.
The victim had been dead around 7 to 9 months. The skull contained long, dark, coarse hair. The skull had a good set of teeth, evidence of a broken nose, and there were several small pieces of newspaper, mostly May issues of the Cleveland News, near this collection of bones. The can was from the, I'm sorry, I do know the can. It was from the Baco brand company, and it was plum butter.
It was a plum butter can?
Plum. I've never even heard of plum butter.
I want some now.
But it sounds good because I fucking love plums.
I love butter, and I love plums as well. When you bring those two things together in a can,
You know how much I love a juicy plum. There's certain seasons when there's specific fruit that's ripe and delicious.
there is a plum season.
And when it's plum season, don't I get so excited when we go in the store and I see juicy plums, and then I come home and I eat them and the juice just drips down my chin and I look like a little pig because I'm like, meow, 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 meow.
Oh, it's so good. And I think plum and grape season are right there together because you have a real good 2.5, maybe 3 weeks where you're very excited about the fruits, and it's plum and grape season. It's a real big
Because
thing.
like right now it's orange season.
Is it?
And I got me a big old bag of Caracaras because it's my favorite oranges.
Oh, and they're just right now.
I can't wait to eat them.
Baby, I want some of your plum butter.
So I've never had plum butter, but now I want some. So it was traced to a nearby company who told investigators they sold between 300 to 440 cans of plum butter to bakeries across the city. One of the boxes used to build this container that victim 11 had been in was from a seafood company, and the box held frozen haddock fillets. Another box was from a local biscuit company on Lakeview Avenue or Boulevard or whatever it is.
Taste the biscuits, baby.
Taste the goodness of the biscuits.
And so you got plum butter and haddock, and biscuits.
The box, according to a serial number, was about a year old because they were able to go to this biscuit company, find the serial number, and they do get a bit of information here, Dylan. The tea cookies inside from the biscuit company were shipped via the Nickel Plate Railroad on June 17th, 1938. So got the railroad involved. There was no way to trace further beyond that. Strangely enough, they were able to trace the quilt. Remember, the body had been wrapped in butcher paper, and then it was wrapped
summer
in
coat?
some coat, and then a quilt.
So how in the world do they trace the quilt?
Well, this is interesting because it was described as like some kind of, I guess, brightly patterned homemade quilt.
Yeah, I know. I would imagine short of someone in the family of, the grandmother who made this quilt recognizing it. How in the world?
Well, Dylan, it's great that you ask. A photograph of the quilt was published in a local newspaper, and a man came forward to say he had sold it to a junk man back in the summer. The junk man insisted he'd sold the quilt to Scoville Rag and Paper Company, which was located in the same seedy neighborhood where Florence Polillo and Rose Wallace had disappeared.
Really?
The company's owner said they had been stockpiling rags, and there was no break into this warehouse. So, hey, we've got all these quilts and rags and things we've been stockpiling. We haven't had anybody break in and steal it. So that leads investigators to believe perhaps it was an employee who took the quilt.
Wow.
The premises was searched. They went around to each employee along with their families and interviewed them about this quilt. But no one admitted to knowing anything about the quilt.
Yeah, and there's a number. I mean, this is a really good lead. And
But investigators like Murillo, he's having a really hard time believing that this killer just happened to walk into this warehouse and take a quilt.
right.
That just didn't make sense to him.
You're saying it's more likely in his mind that it is an employee who these materials
someone
are
who
around
had
him.
access to this
Right.
quilt.
Yeah, and if people are unfamiliar with the quilts, it might be a regional thing. I'm not sure. I'm sure everyone knows what a quilt is, but they're very, especially back in the day. They have people almost have a signature way of making them.
Well, they're different patterns.
They're different. They're very specific. They're one of a kind.
You have to think of the fabric that's used.
They're
Most
unique.
Quilts are like patchwork. They use multiple pieces of fabric.
Right.
So they're very distinct.
Very distinct.
Murillo told the press the killer was changing his technique. The first 2 bodies were found in September of 1935, and he left those together. Now he is leaving 2 more bodies, but this time, hey, I'm leaving these bodies with heads.
Right.
Yeah. Another shocking discovery was made when the body of an armless, footless man washed ashore at Gordon Park along the Erie North Coast. This raised alarms about a 3rd victim within 2 days. However, the arms and legs had likely been detached from being in the water for a year plus. So the coroner determined there was no dismemberment.
Right. He's probably not seeing tool marks on the bones.
Right. Elliot Ness had enough. Public agitation, the sensational news coverage, and finding 2 more mutilated bodies, it was becoming clear that law enforcement had run out of leads, and they were just getting nowhere with this investigation. On August 18th of 1938, Elliot Ness and a team of 25 detectives and uniformed officers mapped out a strategic raid of the hobo jungles that spread across Kingsbury Run. If vagrant squatters refused to let police into their little makeshift shanties, they had the door bashed in. The men were led out into the darkness. 61 vagrants were picked up by police during this nighttime raid and taken to the Central Police Station. Once the area was cleared, 2 companies of firemen soaked the shanties with coal oil and lit them on fire.
Wow. This seems like a rather aggressive move in my book.
Elliot Ness justified the raid as an attempt to deprive the killer of prey. However, the press and others argued that burning the hobo village was cruel and not conducive to cracking the case. An editorial said, quote, "We can see no justification for the jailing of the jobless and penniless men and the wrecking of their miserable hovels without permitting them to collect their personal belongings."
I kind of agree, and I do believe that they likely trampled these people's civil rights.
Yeah.
In many different ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
The last of Cleveland's shanty towns went up in flames on September 9th. In just over 3 weeks, police had destroyed 100 shacks. Of the roughly 300 people evicted from these shanty towns, fewer than 12 ended up at the local shelter, which was known as Wayfarer's Lodge. Many fled the area, fearing the police and also the butcher. If the campaign to drive out the homeless was a positive in some residents' eyes, others thought it only highlighted Ness's failures to catch the killer. His reputation took a hit, and he would never recover. The freedom and trust he once had began to erode. 4 days later, on August 22nd, Ness launched another draconian operation of questionable legality. Ness, believing the butcher must live somewhere in the neighborhoods bordering Kingsbury Run, dispatched 6 two-man teams of detectives and fire wardens into a 10-mile radius. They would enter and inspect the premises, homes, apartments, whatever, without a search warrant, under the notion that they were doing fire inspections. But they were actually looking for signs of butcher activity. So illegally entering and searching homes.
And what's messed up about that is if anyone gets a wind of that, say a defense attorney or anyone, any watchdog groups, you're going to wreck the case. And that's why you have to have this integrity as far as the case in court.
So I think about this parallel to over this 3-week period, they're just burning down these random shanty towns.
Yeah.
They're also illegally searching and entering homes
Yeah.
and harassing people.
So it's almost like they've lost it, and the investigators are kind of out of control. And you better believe
well,
that
it
there
seems
was
like Elliot Ness is out of
Right.
control because these are men he's leading.
right, exactly. And I'm sure that there was multiple goals trying to be achieved when they basically raised and ran off and burned these shanty towns or whatever. And some of them had nothing to do with the investigation. It doesn't bother some people that all these people's stuff got burned up and they kind of moved on out of fear of further harassment because, these are the poorest, indigent people in the area.
Well, yeah, and this definitely benefited Elliot Ness as the safety director because he doesn't have to police those areas.
Yeah.
His firemen don't have to go deal with these people, put out their fires. They're not draining resources.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, let's run these people out of town. I mean, it's really shitty. The operation was kept secret from the public and press, quote, not to alert the killer. But really, Elliot Ness just did not want people to know he's being a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And that what he's doing is illegal.
I've thrown the Constitution and all my local laws and statutes out the windows, and I'm doing whatever I want at this point.
Well, guess what? The operation turned up nothing. The press took the chance to not only discredit Ness for his illegal operation when this finally came out, but also to shine light on the terrible living conditions in the downtown area. During the searches, it was revealed that hundreds of people were living in fire traps without toilets or running water. Families were shoved into crowded single rooms, and sleeping on the floor. Rats were also a huge problem. Like there was a rodent infestation in many of these tenement buildings.
Oh my gosh. Have you ever seen some of those videos right quick in Australia where they have some of these like out in the country around these farms, these infestations of rats to where there's literally like, and these little mice, there's like thousands. Like they'll move one thing and there's like 100 rodents under it, like under one tub or barrel.
No, but that sounds terrible.
It is like the end of days.
I don't want to see that.
It's like a full-on pestilence. It doesn't even seem real.
Like an invasion of the rats.
Ah, yeah, and then they got the feral cat problem also in
What
Australia.
is that movie with Crispin Glover where he's got
it's a Wilbur.
Wilbur with the rat?
Yeah, and then there's the feral
Well,
cat.
isn't there like? Doesn't he have sort of like a giant community of rats that start living in his house?
Yeah,
Like, doesn't he become like the rat whisperer in this film?
yeah, and he's controlling their murderous rat pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have a feral cat problem. They have robots that kill the cats, dude.
Robots?
They have robots they deploy that kill the cats. You know what it does?
I'm sorry, I'm distracted by Rufus being
No,
cute.
it's okay. Oh,
He came over to me like, hello, look at me, I'm adorable.
so it doesn't kill other animals and kill anything unintended besides the feral cats. And what it does is it spritzes when it recognizes it recognizes the cat's gait by watching it walk. And when it does say it is indeed a cat, when it comes near enough, it sprays poison on the cat's fur. And then the cat licks it off and it dies. Is that not crazy?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Rufus is in my lap if you hear him, and he smells like a corn chip.
Nice.
He was all covered up.
All
over
right,
some
let's
things.
get back on this track.
Okay. Well, the raids in August of 1938 became a major turning point in Elliot Ness's career. From then on, his star faded. For 4 years, the Torso Killer had terrorized and fascinated Cleveland. Under the direct leadership of the famous lawman, the investigation failed to find this killer. Despite the failures, Murillo and Zalewski continued investigating the murders and tracking down leads and suspects. May 3rd of 1940, yardmen running a random check on a boxcar near Pittsburgh found a dismembered corpse, the head missing, the body parts wrapped separately in burlap. In a second car, they found another dismembered body, also missing a head, and in a third car, another decapitated, decomposed body of a man with the word Nazi carved into the chest.
Same train, boxcar. 3 boxcars in a row. They each have a dismembered body in it or decapitated.
Yep.
What in the world?
The Pittsburgh coroner noted the bodies had been cut by an expert with anatomical knowledge, such as a butcher or physician. All men had been dead about 3 months, which meant they had likely been killed in Youngstown, Ohio, because that's where the boxcars had been at that time. And then they were moved at a specific point, and they were kind of closed off, and they weren't being used.
Right.
Right. So when they go to open these boxcars, going to use them again. Oh, wait, there's 3 bodies.
Yeah, some of these trains, especially out in like the Midwest, these freight trains, some of them are miles long. You know what I mean? And some of these cars can get stuck in a train yard or something like that for, months and months on end.
None of the missing heads were ever found. One of the victims was identified using fingerprints as 29-year-old drifter James Nicholson. Nicholson had, and this is what was reported in the book, I'm not sure why this was useful information, but he had a record of homosexual activity,
Oh, gosh.
burglary, and trespassing.
Ooh.
Murillo believed the murders were connected to the others in Cleveland.
So basically,
he thinks this is the same killer who's moved on, has gone back to the Pittsburgh area, doing it all over again.
and he would steal your heart and then steal your TV. So that's how that
Mutilated
works.
bodies continued to accumulate. Wallace Brown, a recent parolee, was found dumped along the Monongahela River, which I know
Wow.
we did a case there, but I don't know how to say that. In late 1939, missing a head. A pair of amputated legs floated down the Ohio River near Pittsburgh on May 31st of 1941. And on June 21st of 1942, the decapitated body of a man named Ernest Alonzo was also found in the river.
Oh, but they identified. See, they've only identified a few of all these victims, right? A
Right.
handful.
New York City saw 2 headless bodies wash up in burlap bags in the Hudson River in mid-1945. The headless, mutilated body of a woman named Lydia Thompson was found in a swamp near Pontiac, Michigan in October of 1945. Murillo firmly believed the killer rode the rails and performed the murders in empty boxcars.
Well, think about it. He would be comfortable, and especially if it's in transit and you've shut the door, nobody's going to bother you. There's no. I mean, there's.
So his theory is this killer is riding the rails, he's murdering these people in boxcars, and then he is able to discard from the railroad into the river, into the lake, or wherever around Kingsbury Run, because that is where all the railroads.
Yeah, and typically a rail crossing over like
Routed.
a waterway would be. It's not right by it's not in the public. You know what I mean? It's always down somewhere by itself.
Well, if you're on a railroad bridge,
Yeah.
how easy would it be just to throw these out of the boxcar
Yeah.
as you're moving along?
And there's going to be no public around to see you. I mean, this really actually makes a lot of sense as to how the killer was able to move and spread these bodies all over the place without being seen.
And Murillo believed that these killings were all the work of the same person from Cleveland to Pittsburgh. They all seem to be following these major railroads, New York. He thinks this is all the work of one person.
And again, it would be an easy jump on a train to go, some hours away or whatever, and then come right back and out of the public's eye. It's really ingenious. It fits a lot of checks a lot of boxes.
So going back in time a little bit here, in 1940, Murillo was finally able to go undercover. Like the whole time, he has really wanted to be like, Dylan, I want to go be a hobo and eat pork and beans on a train.
So he needs a hobo name, and he's like, put me in, coach. He's ready to play.
He's been asking, and so he finally he's asks, and now he receives. He finally was able to dress as a vagrant and began riding the rails between northwestern Ohio and western Pennsylvania in search of the butcher. He thought being at ground zero might give him an edge. The desperate men who lived on society's fringes, however, would not be quick to share their experiences with an outsider.
No, and they can probably smell cop on this guy.
So for about 3 weeks, Murillo and a few others tried to infiltrate the clannish hobos, but were eventually called back home. His partner, Zalewski, was assigned to lighter duties, and Murillo continued his work. He would kind of work with whoever was assigned to him as a partner until the official investigation ended. He died in 1958. Murillo's meticulous notes on the torso case are the best documentation remaining. Many of the old case files have been lost to history.
Wow. That is so wild. I mean, there's so many characters in the story and so many years and so many victims.
Okay, so we got to talk a little bit about Elliot Ness Dillon. In December of 1938, a letter was sent to Ness from a person claiming he had moved to California, killed a woman there, and buried her head in Los Angeles. In the letter, this anonymous writer referred to himself as a DC, or Doctor of Chiropractic.
Oh, gosh.
A decade later, the confession letter had authorities wondering if the torso murderer had a connection to the Black Dahlia case.
What? That's insane.
Well, if you think about it, it's sort of similar.
Yeah. You
what
have a
happened.
mutilated woman famously
Dissected
left in
and just
the alley.
left
Yeah.
in a field. Yeah.
In a field, yeah.
Of the 9,100 people, 9,100 people that were interrogated during the torso investigation, only 2 major suspects emerged. That's a lot of people.
Well, that's a lot, but if you get a real solid suspect, even one out of that, I guess you're lucky better than sometimes.
So the first suspect we're going to talk about is Frank Dolezal. He was an immigrant bricklayer, and he was arrested in July of 1938 and charged with the murders. The 52-year-old had connections to the victim Flo Polillo, having lived with her for a period. He also knew Edward Andrassy and was an acquaintance of Rose Wallace. His confession was mostly incoherent, with a few explicit details, which appeared to be learned through coaching.
Okay.
And was kind of beaten up and abused during interrogation, and then started making confessions.
So they wanted this to stick. They wanted to finally have a suspect arrested, and yeah.
While awaiting trial, Dolezal was found dead in his cell of a suicide. However, it is now believed he was murdered due to the fact he had broken ribs and many other injuries that were discovered during autopsy. A few actually believe he was the torso killer now.
Really?
Like, most people are like, dude, he didn't do it. Just a patsy, right? Elliot Ness held a man for over 2 weeks in a hotel for questioning. Ness developed the suspect and pursued him, and that man was Dr. Francis Sweeney. He was an intelligent and skilled surgeon who lived near Kingsbury Run. Sweeney had been orphaned at a young age, but managed to work and put himself through medical school. He had access to a facility with a nearby mortuary, a perfect location for dismembering bodies. Yet Sweeney never confessed to the murders. Immediately after being held by Elliot Ness, Sweeney committed himself to a sanatorium, and the murders seemed to stop. Though Sweeney was considered highly intelligent, when he was 29 years old, he began developing schizophrenia. He was treated for alcoholism a few times before that. Sweeney was married for a period, but his wife eventually divorced him because of his alcoholism and how violent and abusive he had become, especially when he was drinking. According to reports, Sweeney's deterioration reached a climax around the time that the Lady of the Lake washed ashore in 1934. Sweeney had spent the majority of his life in and around Kingsbury Run, so he was very familiar with the neighborhood and its residents. He was large and strong, definitely powerful enough to carry bodies around. Dr. Sweeney was also known to be bisexual, which profilers have used to explain why he killed both men and women. To date, there are some experts on the case who agree he is the best suspect in the Cleveland torso killings.
It seems pretty, well, he's a doctor, so he has the anatomical knowledge, and he's a big, strong guy. I mean, what else do you want?
Elliot Ness always felt Sweeney was the killer and had even administered a polygraph exam. The polygraph administrator felt Sweeney was also the killer. And he was very antagonistic during this period of time. almost taunting Elliot Ness, like, "Oh, you think I'm the killer? Well, where's your proof?" I mean, just
Oh, wow.
yeah. After the interview, because this went on for 2 weeks, that he was polygraphed, repolygraphed, interrogated, whatever. Elliot Ness was left alone in the hotel room with him, and he realized the other officers had left him there. He later told his wife that was the first and only time in his professional law enforcement career that he had ever felt afraid for his safety.
Really?
Like even dealing with Al Capone and gangsters during Prohibition. He said this hulking man sitting across from him in this hotel room, like taunting him, he felt afraid
Wow.
of this guy.
And it seems like the guy has some attitude to
Yeah,
boot.
he said everything about this guy was like
Yeah.
very unnerving.
He's not just someone who's pissed off because you're trying to throw him in the suspect pool. He's almost like enjoying the back and forth, which is very strange, very strange.
Now, here's something we have to talk about, Dylan, because this definitely played a role in Sweeney's, I guess, potential arrest. He was related to a high-profile politician, Congressman Martin Sweeney. And Martin Sweeney, the congressman, did not want Elliot Ness to pursue his cousin as a suspect, release his name to the press, and kind of thwarted the investigation.
So he didn't want the Sweeney name tied up in this,
No.
basically.
So basically, Elliot Ness is kind of told, like, you need to drop this.
That's not the best. That's not a good reason to drop this. That's a bad reason to drop it, because that's what happens when someone is guilty and they have powerful or connected friends or family. Is you don't ever get to find out. You don't get to prove or disprove whether or not they're the killer because they won't allow you to. So that's very, very interesting.
Right? From 1938, after he is released, from questioning and all that, until his death in 1965, Sweeney admitted himself to state hospitals and veteran hospitals in various parts of the country, staying for weeks and months at a time. He would be released for a short period, and then he would go commit himself again. So he voluntarily stayed in institutions for the rest of his life.
Okay.
While at the Veterans Hospital in Dayton, he sent a series of strange but instigating postcards to Elliot Ness. Like
let it go.
Trying to annoy him, taunt him.
That's strange.
Be a menace.
That's strange behavior, because an innocent person will be glad you're leaving them alone now, and they'd want to go on with their life. Most people, unless he just thought it was getting some kind of a kick out of messing with the, famous Elliot Ness.
Well, again, it seems like Sweeney is
the killer.
The best and most likely suspect.
And he's enjoying the back and forth with Ness.
Because we know a lot of killers want to taunt law enforcement.
And they want that attention.
The Zodiac Killer, the Freeway Phantom. They contact the media. They want this notoriety.
BTK. It was his downfall.
So after unsuccessful calls from the public to resign from his position, Elliot Ness finally left in 1942, where he moved on to Washington, D.C. for government work. His later years were plagued by alcoholism, which is ironic considering he was the main Prohibition
the famous
guy, right?
Yeah.
He had a failed attempt at running for mayor of Cleveland in 1947. In his later years, Ness, by then thrice divorced, held a series of menial jobs, such as working as a bookstore clerk and selling frozen hamburger patties before dying in obscurity.
Okay.
He was virtually penniless at the end. The Untouchables was published after Ness's death. It was adapted into a film starring Sean Connery and Kevin Costner and was released in 1987. And there was a pretty good, I say long-running TV show, The Untouchables, in the 1950s, starring Robert Stack.
Really?
As Elliot Ness.
Oh, I'm going to have to check some of that out.
To date, the Cleveland torso murders remain unsolved. If you are ever curious and are in Cleveland, the Cleveland Police Museum is open to the public and offers exhibits of some of the death masks. And they have a whole collection on Elliot Ness. And they have a lot of information from the torso era.
Well, I've got to say, if there's one picture you go look at Murillo as a undercover as a hobo, and he's nailing it, dude.
I'm going to post that photo on our Instagram page.
He looks
Appalachian True Crime. If you want to see Murillo dressed as a hobo, I've got some other photos to post there as well. And some of the more graphic and disturbing photos I post on Patreon. So they are behind a paywall. But if you would like to check out patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast, not only will you be supporting the show, but you're going to access bonus content, ad-free episodes, and more.
5 years of bonus content,
true.
folks.
Dylan, we need to wrap this up.
We got to wrap it up.
I have to say my nose is stuffy. It's time for some more Mucinex.
Yes.
I'm tongue-tied and I'm tired. I'm all spent now.
I know you've worked so hard on this for actually some weeks now because it's such a big story. And I really have enjoyed it. And I didn't know anything at all about this.
Well, I know I'm sick and I'm probably not the most exciting.
I think the listeners will agree with me that you did a great
but
job.
But I do appreciate everyone who is powering through. I'm powering through. Thank you for being there for me.
Yes.
You guys are great.
So, yes, I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Heather. And I would like to thank our listeners for listening.
5 years, baby.
5 years. And it's surreal for us to even talk about it amongst ourselves. I remember all those years ago, Heather's like, hey, I've been always wanted to do a podcast, but nobody will ever stick it out and keep doing it with me. And will you do it? And we tried, it started, and we never imagined that we would even have 10 listeners, let alone tens of thousands of listeners.
All over the world.
All over the world. We've been top of charts in true crime and improv comedy and all kinds of different platforms and countries. We've passed 1 million downloads, right? We have all these 5 years of bonus content. We have patrons. We have old patrons, new patrons. We never, ever thought that we would be able to achieve any of this. And we could have not done any of it without, well, obviously Heather and the listeners. So I want to thank them here at the beginning of 2024. Screw I was being negative earlier. It's going to be a great year. It's going to be so much better than last year. Let's just manifest that. And anything else there, Heather?
I love you guys.
All
Happy
right.
New Year.
Happy New
I
Year.
hope 2024 kicks all the asses. I hope you all make 2024 your bitch.
Make 2024 your bitch. We hope this podcast finds you happy, fed, and safe.
Like Hall & Oates, you all making my dreams come true.
It's true.
Thanks for that. We have Dylan. We are going to have an interesting case next.
Oh, one last thing. We're also been a part of the Darkcast network. So check that
that's
out.
awesome. We're still part of the Darkcast network going into 2024. They have invited us back to be part of that network. I'm so thankful for CJ and all the support we get from the other great indie podcasters over there. But we have a kick-ass episode coming out this weekend, Dylan.
What is it?
It's kind of a famous. We're going to talk about a rock star.
Oh, you're just going to leave it at that?
A rock star and a murder.
You big old tease. Well, I can't wait. I'm so ready.
I know we're going to go finish watching a documentary about it right now.
I'm going to go put you to bed.
All right, guys. No, I'm watching the documentary and I'm taking some cold medicine.
I'm going to smoke a cigarette
All right.
and blow my
Bye,
nose.
y'all.
Bye.